What's up everybody, welcome back to another episode of Outlawed Motors. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can turn your rusty bolts into shiny new ones. Whether you're working on an old vintage like my 3.0 CS or a fairly new car like my 2010 Mini Cooper S, where we're doing some extensive modifications, rust happens. And as we've shown before, there's definitely ways of addressing rust, such as sandblasting, powder coating, but what do you do with bolts? If you're dealing with BMW, it can be prohibitively expensive to go out and just buy new bolts. I was curious to see how much it would cost to replace all of the bolts from the firewall forward on my Mini Cooper, and it would have cost over $1,500 US for brand new bolts. Now I'm sure I can find a bunch of them, sourcing them in aftermarket, but after going to a few places with bolts in hand, it was very hard to identify the right ones. So in short, I figured I may as well try to restore the bolts going in. I didn't really like the idea of putting brand new parts and securing them with rusty bolts. Apart from looking nice, there are some benefits to restoring your bolts. Primarily that they won't seize when you put them back in. Rust naturally is not very good for any metal, but when you put a rusty bolt back in, it can seize and make it very difficult to take out. You can naturally use anti-seize, but in some applications, it's not advised to use anti-seize. So then, if you're putting a rusty bolt in without anti-seize, there's a high likelihood that this could bond and would be very difficult to get out, and you could end up taking the head off or anything like that, which is just not very fun. Now you may find that it's cheaper to just go out and buy the bolts again, so do some research, but there are some cases where you might want to restore your bolts. First and foremost, if it's hard to find the bolts or expensive, then it definitely makes sense to restore them. If you have a bulk of them, there's an economies of scale that you can benefit from. And the other aspects are aesthetic, which obviously they do look nice. And lastly, if you've taken some subframe parts or other bits to get sandblasted, then you should coat them, because then they're just bare metal and eventually they'll rust and it's not going to be great. There may be some scenarios where it makes sense not to restore your nuts and bolts. And in fact, maybe you shouldn't do it, period. Now, for certain subframe bolts on my Mini, as well as the copper studs that mount the exhaust manifold and the intake manifold, those should be replaced every time you remove them. So make sure that you look through your catalog and your manual and do your homework to make sure that you're not putting back bolts or nuts that should never have gone back in. After some trial and error, I found the most effective method was a 3-step process of cleaning and degreasing, rust removal, and zinc plating my nuts and bolts. Now you can skip the zinc plating, but it definitely increases their lifespan, fights against rust, and overall has a really nice finish, which will look awesome once they're in. First off, what you'll want to do is take a wire wheel or wire brush and take off all the dirt, grit, and grime. Any Loctite or oil on there definitely has to be removed. You can use a degreaser or some brake clean with a clean towel and get as much as you can off. You don't want anything in the threads, as it will be difficult for the solution and the zinc plating to get at those spots. The next step is using a rust removal bath. I got Metal Rescue from Canadian Tire, but there's plenty out there. I would strongly advise finding an eco-friendly one. It's better for you and better for the environment. If you're using an eco-friendly solution, then you can totally use any yogurt containers or anything you find in your recycling bin. Just fill them up and throw your bolts in. Make sure that the solution is as close to room temperature as possible. If it's in too cold conditions, it won't work as well. Leave them in for at least 24 hours. I left them in for about 2 to 3 days. When you're done, just strain out the solution into another yogurt container and check out your results. You can reuse the rust removal solution for a while, but be sure to read the directions on the side of the container to make sure you're using it correctly. Now the result at this point is pretty impressive. It does remove any minor corrosion and cleans them up pretty well. I'd be totally satisfied with putting this in as is. However, I wanted to take it a step further and I took my bolts to get zinc plated. Now you don't have to go the distance of zinc plating all your bolts, but if you want to increase the longevity of your bolts, it's definitely worthwhile. If you want to stop short and actually just put them in rust solution, that also works as well, depending on if it takes off the finish or not. Overall, I was very happy with the results that the metal rescue solution had, as well as the zinc plating. Be sure that when you get them back from zinc plating that you do a good inspection and that all of the rust is removed. Make sure to take photos of all your bolts when you're removing them, so it's easy to identify which ones belong to which after restoring them. Hopefully you found this video informative and educational. If you like this video, give a thumbs up. If you have any comments or feedback, definitely leave it below. If you haven't subscribed, hit that button. Always give us a like. Thanks so much. Have a good one.